He raised his glass, smiled at the crowd, and said something that made 300 people go quiet. And I felt the blood drain from my face, not from shame, but from the absolute certainty that I had waited long enough. That moment is where I need to start. But to understand what I did next, you have to know where I came from. I grew up in Sudbury, Ontario, which is the kind of place that either breaks you or builds something unbreakable in your chest. My father worked the nickel mines. My mother worked the school cafeteria. We weren't poor in the way people talk about poverty on television. We were the kind of poor where you don't notice until you're older. When you look back and realize there was never a second pair of winter boots, never a birthday cake from a bakery, never a dentist visit that didn't involve waiting 3 weeks for a public clinic appointment. I learned early that you hold your head up, you do the work, you don't ask for things that won't come. When I was 26, I met a man named Thomas at a union meeting for the hospital where I just started working as a licensed practical nurse. He was a pipe fitter, built like someone who had earned every inch of himself. He had this laugh, loud and unself-conscious, the kind that makes strangers turn and smile even when they don't know the joke. We married 11 months later in the church on Paris Street. My dress cost $90 from a consignment shop in the South End, and I have never once been embarrassed about that. Our daughter arrived 2 years later. We named her June, because she was born on the 1st of that month, and because Thomas said she came in like summer, sudden and warm and impossible to ignore. The three of us lived in a bungalow on a street full of bungalows. Thomas drove a beat-up Silverado. I did 12-hour shifts. We had a plan, pay down the mortgage in 15 years, put June through university, maybe take a trip to Cape Breton when we were done with the hard part. Thomas died on a Thursday in November when June was 4 years old. It wasn't dramatic, the way tragedies are in movies. He came home early from the job site complaining of chest pain, sat down in the kitchen chair, and was gone before the ambulance arrived. Massive cardiac event, they told me. He was 38 years old. I remember the casseroles that people brought after the funeral. I remember the church ladies and the neighbors and the union brothers who filled the house for a week. And then I remember the day it went quiet, and I was sitting at the kitchen table at 6 in the morning and June was still asleep. And I thought, I have to get up now. And I have to keep getting up every single day until this child is okay. So that is what I did. I finished my practical nursing diploma and enrolled in a bridging program at Laurentian. I became a registered nurse when June was in grade 3. I worked nights so I could be home in the afternoons when she got off the school bus. I made her lunches the night before, labeled them with little notes because I read somewhere that children need to feel thought of. I went to every school concert, every parent-teacher night, every swim meet. I was tired in a way that lives in the bones, but I was there. I was always there. June was a serious child. Quiet, watchful, the kind of girl who reads the instructions before she does anything. She was not like me. I was always running at things sideways, but she had Thomas's steadiness, that grounded quality that made people trust her before she'd even spoken. She did well in school without being showy about it. She worked a part-time job at a grocery store through high school and saved her own money. When she got into Ryerson nursing, like me, though she'd deny being influenced, I was standing in the kitchen and I had to sit down on the floor because my legs stopped working properly. I didn't tell her about the letter from the Ontario Workers' Safety and Insurance Board. I should have. I know that now. I knew it then, if I'm being honest with myself. But I was so afraid of what it would open up. The questions, the anger, the reliving, that I folded it and put it in a shoebox in the back of my closet and told myself I would deal with it when June was settled. The letter concerned a man named Reginald Hartwell. I had encountered Reginald Hartwell exactly once in my life, at a WSIB hearing 3 years after Thomas died. His company, a subcontracting firm called Hartwell Industrial Services, had been the employer of record on the site where Thomas had spent his last 18 months. The hearing was about safety violations, pressure relief protocols that were not followed, reporting procedures that had been falsified, a culture of covering up near misses to protect the contract. The board found procedural failures. There was a fine. Reginald Hartwell sat across the room from me in a gray suit and never once looked in my direction. I had gone alone to that hearing. June was with my sister. I had sat in a plastic chair in a government building in Sudbury and listened to men in suits speak about my husband's death in the language of liability and compliance documentation, and I had understood very clearly that nothing meaningful was going to happen to Reginald Hartwell. He received a fine. His company received a fine, and that was the end of it. The letter in my shoebox, the one I didn't show June, was a follow-up inquiry from a journalist at a provincial labor publication. She had been researching a pattern of WSIB violations across multiple Hartwell job sites. She wanted to know if I would speak to her. The letter was dated the spring of June's second year at Ryerson. I wrote back a brief note saying I was not ready to speak, and I filed her contact information in the same shoebox. And I told myself I would return to it someday. What I didn't know then was that someday was already walking toward me. June came home for Thanksgiving in her third year of school with something different about her. She was lighter somehow, more present. She laughed more easily over dinner. On the Sunday before she drove back to Toronto, she sat down at the kitchen table and told me she had met someone. His name was Owen, she said. He was in his final year of a civil engineering degree. He was kind, she said. He was patient and funny, and he didn't make her feel small. She looked at me the way she did when she wanted something to be true so badly that she was checking my face for permission. I told her I was happy for her. I meant it. I met Owen that Christmas. He drove up from Barrie with a bottle of Niagara ice wine and helped me carry wood in from the back without being asked. He was tall and careful-spoken, the kind of young man who waits to see what the room needs before he decides what to do. I liked him immediately. He called me Mrs. Beaumont, and when I told him to call me Joelle, he nodded and did it without making a thing of it. June told me his parents lived in Barrie, that his father had built a construction company from the ground up, that his mother was involved in hospital fundraising. She said they were very successful. She said she thought they could be formal sometimes, but that Owen's dad had been warm when she met him. I did not ask the last name. I don't know why. Perhaps because it was Christmas. Because Owen was sitting in Thomas's old chair eating my butter tarts and looking at my daughter like she was the most interesting person in the room. Because I didn't want to interrupt that with anything sharp or administrative. Perhaps because some part of me didn't want to know. June and Owen got engaged in March. She called me from a park in Toronto at 8 in the morning, and she was laughing and crying at the same time, and I was holding the phone against my chest in the hallway of my house, feeling joy and terror in equal measure the way mothers do at these moments. "What's his father's name?" I asked when she'd caught her breath. There was a pause. "Reginald," she said. My hand went still on the phone. "Hartwell?" I said. Another pause. Longer. And in that pause, I understood everything. "Mum," she said. "You knew. I found out in the fall. I was going to tell you. I didn't know how." I can't adequately describe what I felt in that moment. It wasn't only anger, though there was anger, it was something more like vertigo. The world tilting slightly. The familiar walls of my house suddenly at the wrong angle. "He doesn't know who you are," June said quickly. "Owen doesn't know." "Owen has no idea. I want to keep it that way. I need this not to become. I need this to be mine. Just mine. This relationship, this life. Please." I didn't say anything for a long time. "Mom, I need to think," I said, and I hung up. I stood in my hallway for a very long time. Then I went to my closet and got the shoebox. That spring was one of the strangest periods of my life. On the surface, nothing changed. I went to work, I came home, I talked to June about wedding venues and catering menus, and whether the bridesmaids should wear sage or dusty blue. She had decided to let the relationship with Owen's family unfold naturally, without revealing the connection to the past, and I had agreed because my daughter asked me to, and because I was not yet ready for what coming forward would require. But I was not idle. I found the journalist's contact information in the shoebox. Her name was Audra, and she was still at the same publication. She remembered me. When I told her I was ready to talk, she went quiet for a moment, and then she said, "There's been a development. I think you should come to Toronto." What Audra had found over the intervening years was considerable. Hartwell Industrial Services had continued operating throughout Ontario. There had been 2 additional WSIB proceedings, one involving a fall injury at a commercial build in Hamilton, one involving chemical exposure at an industrial site in Sault Ste. Marie. In both cases, the company had received warnings, not penalties. There were former employees who had spoken to Audra off the record. There were internal documents that had been obtained through access to information requests that suggested systematic underreporting. Audra had been trying to find a named source who would go on record, someone the public could see, someone whose story would give the pattern a human face. I told her, "I'll be that person." But I asked for time. I told her I had a family situation that needed to resolve first. We agreed after the wedding. I want to say here, clearly and for anyone who needs to hear it, that I did not keep my silence at my daughter's wedding out of weakness or cowardice. I kept it because June asked me to, and because she is my daughter, and because she was so genuinely happy in a way I had been afraid she might never find, and because I had already decided what was going to happen afterward, and I needed Reginald Hartwell to feel safe until it did. I met the man himself for the first time at the rehearsal dinner, held at a restaurant in downtown Barrie overlooking Kempenfelt Bay. He was heavy-set now, silver-haired, deeply tanned in the way of men who spend their winters in Florida. His wife, Beverly, Owen's mother, was a quiet, careful woman who squeezed my hand and said she was so glad to finally meet me. She meant it, I think. I felt no hostility from her. Reginald shook my hand with the confident pressure of a man who has never in his life wondered whether a room liked him. He smiled at me. He had no idea who I was. I introduced myself as June's mother. I said I was a nurse at Health Sciences North. I said it had been a beautiful drive down from Sudbury. At the mention of Sudbury, something moved behind his eyes. But he smiled and moved on to the next conversation, and I let him. The wedding was held on a Saturday in September at a heritage property outside Barrie, an old estate that had been converted to an event venue. Red brick and oak trees and a ceremony in the garden as the sun came through the leaves. June was luminous. She wore a dress with long sleeves and her hair braided back, and she walked herself down the aisle, and I sat in the front row and cried without making a sound. Owen cried too, which made me love him more. The reception was in the main hall, round tables with ivory linen, fairy lights through the rafters, the kind of room that makes everyone inside it feel briefly like everything is possible. I was seated, I discovered, at a table with second cousins of Owen's, pleasant people I'd never met, rather than at the head table with the wedding party. I noted it. I didn't say anything. The speeches began after dinner. Owen's best friend spoke. June's maid of honor, her university roommate from Moncton, spoke and made everyone laugh 3 times and cry once. Owen's mother spoke briefly and warmly and said something beautiful about watching her son grow into someone she admired. And then Reginald Hartwell stood up. He was the kind of man who fills a room when he stands. He had clearly done this many times. The easy command of the microphone, the practiced chuckle to warm up the crowd, the proprietary sweep of his gaze across the room as though the occasion belonged to him. I watched him from my table near the back. He spoke about Owen's accomplishments. He spoke about how proud he was to have built something that would last, something he could pass on to his son. He spoke about family legacy, and then he turned, still smiling, still holding the microphone, and he looked out toward the tables, and he said something I will never fully forgive. He said, "A man's family tells you everything you need to know about who he'll become. Owen comes from a long line of builders, of men who made something from nothing. I'm proud of that. And I'm glad he found someone to build beside." He paused. He looked at June at the head table, and then he looked out at the room and said, "Though I'll admit, I was hoping for a little more pedigree on the other side." He laughed. It was a small laugh, meant to land as a joke. Several people chuckled politely. Someone near me inhaled. I felt June's eyes find me across the room. I felt 300 people hold their breath in that particular way of wedding guests who sense a wrong note and don't know what to do with it. And I stood up. I don't know exactly what people expected to happen. Perhaps they thought I would say something brief and gracious, smooth it over the way women of my generation have been trained to smooth things over. Perhaps Reginald Hartwell thought the same. "I'm Joelle Beaumont," I said. My voice was steady. I had been a nurse for over 30 years. I had delivered bad news in quiet rooms and held the hands of people in their last hours and spoken clearly when everything in me wanted to fall apart. I knew how to keep my voice level. I am June's mother. I raised her alone in Sudbury after her father died at 38 years old on a job site where your company, Mr. Hartwell, failed to follow mandated safety protocols. The WSIB found your organization in violation. You paid a fine, and you went back to business. The room had gone completely still. I have spent 30 years becoming a person my daughter could be proud of. I put myself through university. I worked nights and raised her days. I went to every school concert and every parent-teacher interview and every swim meet, and I did it on a nurse's salary alone. So when you talk about pedigree, I paused. I looked directly at him. He had gone very pale. I'd invite you to be specific about what you mean. The silence lasted for what felt like a very long time. Then Owen's mother from the head table started to applaud. Not loud, it started soft, careful, a single person deciding. Owen joined her. And then, table by table, the room began to follow. Reginald sat down. He did not look at me again that evening. June found me 20 minutes later near the coat room. She had been crying. I thought for a moment she was angry, and I braced myself for it, because I had promised her silence and I had broken it, and I knew what that cost. But she put her arms around me and she held on, and she said, "I'm sorry, Mum. I should have told you earlier. I should have let you say it sooner." I held her back. I didn't say anything for a little while. "I'd go off plan," I finally told her. "I've been talking to a journalist named Audra for months. The story runs next week." June pulled back and looked at me. "You've been working on this since the spring. I needed this to be yours first. Your wedding, your day. I wasn't going to take that from you." I looked at her, but I wasn't going to let him have it either. She laughed. It was a strange, wet, relieved sound. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "You're terrifying," she said. "You're welcome," I said. Audra's piece ran the following Thursday in the publication and was picked up within 48 hours by the Toronto Star and CBC News Ontario. It ran long, nearly 4,000 words, and it named Reginald Hartwell directly and laid out the pattern of safety violations across 3 job sites over 15 years, with former employees on record and documents that had never been publicly reported. I was the named source. My photograph ran beside the article, a photo taken at Health Sciences North, me in my scrubs looking directly into the camera. The response was significant. The Ontario Ministry of Labour announced an inquiry within the week. 2 other former employees contacted Audra after the piece ran. A law firm in Hamilton reached out to me about a potential class action. I referred them to the other families I had found through Audra's research, because they were the ones who needed it most. Hartwell Industrial Services did not collapse overnight. These things rarely do. But the inquiry found findings consistent with what the article had reported, and there were further finds, and Reginald Hartwell stepped down from the company in January of the following year. I read the press release from his lawyer on my phone at the nursing station at 2 in the morning and sat with it for a moment before going back to my rounds. I am 62 years old. I am still a nurse. I still live in Sudbury, in the same bungalow, though the mortgage is long paid off and the kitchen has been renovated. June and Owen bought a house in Guelph, which is manageable distance, and their daughter, my granddaughter, Charlotte, who arrived in the spring after the wedding, sleeps in a crib that I helped assemble on a Sunday afternoon in February while the snow came down outside the window. Charlotte has Thomas's coloring, the same wide-set eyes. When I put her down at the end of those visits, I sometimes take a minute in the doorway of her room. I stand there and I look at this small thing asleep in this ordinary crib, in this small house that her parents are paying off with careful choices and hard work, and I think about Thomas in that kitchen chair, and about the shoebox in my closet, and about the 30 years between those 2 points. I am not a person who talks about justice lightly. I have seen enough of this world to know it doesn't arrive cleanly or on schedule, and that waiting for it can hollow you out if you're not careful. What I did slowly. I did it while working and raising a child and living a life. I did not let the waiting become the only thing I was, but I waited. And when the moment came, I was standing. That's the only version of this story I know how to tell. I keep coming back to Charlotte's crib. That Sunday in February, the snow coming down outside, Owen handing me a screwdriver I hadn't asked for yet. Something about that ordinary afternoon holds more weight for me than almost anything else from that whole year. I think about what it cost to get to that room. Not the money, though there was always the money, the nursing shifts, the stretched grocery budgets, the winter boots bought one size too big so they'd last into the next year. I mean the other cost, the one you don't talk about in polite company. The cost of choosing every single morning for 27 years to keep going when keeping going was the only option on the table. Reginald Hartwell sat across from me in a gray government building in 2001 and never once looked my way. And I understood something then that I didn't have language for yet. A person who doesn't need to look at you is a person who has decided you don't matter. That kind of dismissal is a choice. And choices have consequences, even when those consequences take 30 years to arrive. I am not someone who believes the universe is keeping score on our behalf. I don't think justice is automatic or that good people are protected from hard things. Thomas died young, and he was the best person I knew. Life is not tidy in that way. But I do believe this. The way you live inside the hard years shapes what you become capable of. I didn't spend those years plotting revenge. I spent them doing my job, raising my daughter, learning to think clearly under pressure, because that is what nursing teaches you. If you let it, you learn to read a room. You learn to stay calm when something is going wrong. You learn that acting at the right moment with accurate information is almost always more effective than acting out of pure feeling. That is what I brought to the wedding. Not rage, preparation. There is a difference, and it matters. June once asked me, when she was about 12, why I checked everything twice. Why I always had a backup plan, always read the fine print, always knew the name of the person I was dealing with before I walked into a room. I told her it was a habit from nursing. That wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth is that I learned early that no one is coming to make things right on your behalf. That if you want something done, you have to understand the situation well enough to do it yourself. That sounds cold. I don't mean it coldly. I mean it as an act of love. For June, for Thomas, for that younger version of myself sitting in the plastic chair in that government building. The most honest thing I could do for all of them was to pay attention, keep my head, and wait until I could act with something real. What I want for Charlotte, someday, is not a life without difficulty. I want her to be the kind of person who doesn't look away from difficult things, who does the work of understanding before she acts, who keeps her integrity even when no one is watching, especially then, and who, when the moment finally comes that asks something of her, stands up. That's what I had to teach myself. It took 62 years and a February afternoon putting together a crib in Guelph to understand that I'd actually learned it.